They do studies often to see how much we owe people. It's pretty a sad thing to think about. Last year they did a study back in March. So the average household is $16,000 in debt. The average household. Any specialist will tell you that debt, particularly when it's heavy debt, feels like a heavy, heavy burden. Some of you experience that right now. Some of this may make me feel anxious just to talk about it. It does me sometimes when I think about my college loans, but give those to God as best as I can. But a debt that weighs us down. Wherever we go, people in really heavy debt have a hard time purchasing anything, have a hard time getting a home, an apartment, or car. Some people need therapy for it because it weighs them down so much. It's a heavy, heavy debt. Jews talked about sin in different ways, and one of the chief ways Jews in Jesus' time talked about sin was debt. He said our sin is like a debt that we owe to God. In fact, the Christian view is that we're really in debt. It's greater than $16,000 worth. Jesus says in the model prayer in Matthew 6, you remember, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who owe us or who debtors to our debtors. Our sin is like that to Him. It's easy for us to compare ourselves to people we think are pretty good or pretty rotten and then think we're pretty good. I'm no Hitler. I'm no whomever, fill in the blank. I'm not as bad as my mother-in-law. I mean, there's people in life that you might compare yourself to, but it's easy to do that and make ourselves feel pretty good. It's difficult to do that when we compare ourselves to Jesus. And if you don't know Him that well, Jesus was sinless. We see in the Gospel Jesus never committed any sin. He didn't murder, didn't lie, didn't steal. Never hated people, never held grudges. He just didn't. And so when we compare ourselves to Him, and we're supposed to, we realize that we're very much in debt. And at the end of our lives, we will meet God the Father, Son, and Spirit. We'll meet Him, so to speak, face to face. And when we're in His presence, He will know exactly what we owe Him, metaphorically speaking. He'll know. If you have your Bibles, turn to Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Can't miss it. Colossians chapter 2. We'll start in verse 8. Colossians chapter 2. The Apostle Paul is writing to a church in the city of Colossae. They're primarily all Gentile Christians like you and me. Unfortunately, Paul, after he leaves these churches and writes to some of them he's never met, others he has, when he leaves, people come after him and tell him the real gospel, the true gospel, they would probably say, and say, here's how it really works out. He tells that Paul doesn't know what he's talking about. Jesus is great, and He is the Messiah, but you also need to do X, Y, Z. It's Jesus plus. See, Paul has a Jesus diet gospel, right? But for other people, you need Him and other things. Jesus isn't fully enough. You need to do these things according to the moons and the stars and certain festivals and certain things we might think are kind of crazy, but they thought these things were very compelling. That's what they did in the ancient world. And it deceived the churches, small churches. It would deceive them. They didn't know any better. They're new to this Christianity stuff. And here comes a person who sounds like they know what they're talking about. And Paul writes to them and tries to encourage them not to listen to what other people are saying because Jesus has handled it all. Look what he says in verse 8. If you have it, Colossians 2:8. Now, there's a lot going on here, but I'm going to jump in verse 8. See to it that no one makes a prey of you. Don't be duped by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition. Those things just people make up. According to the elemental spirits of the universe, and not according to the Messiah or Christ. For in Him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. Everything, full deity. You don't need anything else. And you have come to fullness in Him, who is the head of all and rule and authority. In Him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, that is, of their heart, you might say, by putting off the body of flesh in the circumcision of Christ. You were buried with Him in baptism, in which you were also raised with Him through faith and the working of God, who raised Him from the dead. And you who were dead in trespasses, you were dead, and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with Him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, having erased or canceled this record of debt which stood against us with his legal demands. And having set it aside, he nailed it to the cross. He disarmed the principalities and powers and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in him. Triumphing over them in him. They used to give out certificates of indebtedness for a long time. They still do to a degree. They used to look like this. Here's one, all the way back from the turn of the century. The state of Ohio owed these people some money. I think it's about $1,000. Certificate of indebtedness, an IOU. Today we don't call these typically certificate of indebtedness. We call them promissory notes. That's the same thing as going on here. It's a signed document. It's a written promise to pay a sum. Verse 14, he says he's canceled the certificate of debt, the promissory note. That's precisely what the cross has done. He took the debt, the sign, the statement that we owed so much, and nailed it to the cross. And nailed it to the cross. Not only did he take that debt and sign it, he defeated the evil powers. You need to understand, because this is true then as was true then as is now. They certainly believe there are evil rulers and authorities. Your translation might have something else there. In verse 15, principalities and powers. Is that what your translation is? Something like that? Rulers and authorities. They reign in the heavenly realms. We're at war. It's very unscientific, very non-modern. I get it. Might sound kind of hokey. Everything that people don't really believe in sounds hokey to them. But it's true. There's a spiritual battle going on all around us. There are evil forces at work in the world that do not want you to be like Jesus. They want you to stay in debt. They fight against you. They fight against your family. They fight against churches. They fight against your friendships. They fight. And they fight. And they fight. And behind the scenes going on, the death of Jesus is not just political powers trying to get rid of old Jesus, but evil forces at work trying their best to end the rescue operation that God the Father has in place through Jesus. And here Paul is saying very clearly, not only was our debt record knocked out clean, but the evil forces that tried to beat him, they were also defeated. But you need to understand that's bizarre. For him to say what he said in verse 15, be triumphing over them, is bizarre. The most shameful torture device invented was this thing right here. It started out probably just as a stake in the ground, but eventually they died too quickly that way. So they added an arm to it so that they could die even longer. Almost always they died naked in front of city streets, interstates, you might say, crossways, intersections, so that everyone in the world could see as they walk by what happens when you threaten Rome. And above the person, they almost always put above the person a sign, a titulus, that would put around their neck as they took this beam to them to the cross. Then they nailed it on top up here, and above that on the sign would have been the crime that got them killed. Not necessarily all the crimes they were supposedly guilty of, but the one that they were being crucified for. And we know what Jesus has said because all four Gospels say it. The claim that got him killed, supposedly, was to be the king of the Jews. And in 3 different languages. Nobody wanted to be crucified. Romans rarely in the history of Rome ever crucified Romans. It was so bad. Paul said to the Corinthians, we preach about a crucified Christ. It's a daggum stumbling block to Jews. They don't get it. And it is nonsense to Gentiles. Who in their right mind would want to sing songs to a dude who was killed in a torture device? What is wrong with y'all? Why would you think for a second this is victorious? You need to hear the irony in this verse 15. Now, the reason why we celebrate it, the reason why it's so wonderful, It's because of what it means for us. Sisters and brothers, in a world that tells us to put our allegiance on all kinds of other things and tells us that bombs, no matter how big they are, can really rid the world of evil. It's not true. There is only one conceivable way to end evil in the world, and that's to get rid of all the humans. The second best way to do it is for someone to take care of the evil consequences that we're owed. And that is why it's a victorious cross. That's why we celebrate on Good Friday. That's why we celebrate, in fact, Good Friday service. Why we do, in fact, celebrate it. But not everyone feels that way in this room and out at this church and most churches around the world. They walk around heavy laden. They don't put down their certificate of indebtedness. They stare at it daily, and they live with constant regret and remorse and guilt. And with tears on their face, I meet them through the years and say, David, you don't know what I've done. And they've never laid it down at the cross. In their mind, they believe it, they understand it, but they don't believe it yet. That old anecdote, it's too good to be true. It's not too good to be true. But to believe it, sometimes it is. And so for those of you particularly who struggle, that maybe you just don't struggle at all, I want you to say this with me as we think more clearly, this horrible torture device used and the victory that it brings. We can say this. The evil powers that once had complete control over me have been defeated. My debt has been paid by Jesus' victorious death. It's a wonderful cross. Now, if you can believe that even a little bit tonight, would you say that with me? The evil powers that once had complete control over me have been defeated. My debt has been paid by Jesus' victorious death. That's why it's a wonderful cross. It's been paid. David, I don't fully understand that. I don't either. I've got 3 degrees. I don't get it. It is a mystery that baffles my brain, and I will never fully understand it. That's exactly why the Apostle Paul calls it the mystery that has been revealed. Oh my goodness. I don't fully know how it works. I don't fully understand how chemical bonds work, but guess what? I'm going to sit my rear end on that pew in a second and believe it's going to work. I don't know how electricity works. I'm going to click that switch on. I believe it's going to turn on. It's still true whether we fully understand every bit of it. And I'm here to tell you, sister and brother, the evil powers that rule over you, if you're a Christian, have been defeated. They've been defeated. Did you hear what I said? That's why it's a wonderful cross. It's okay to be happy about it. It's okay to be happy about that. Well, David, when I go on Christian life, I need to tell people I'm a rotten old dirty sinner. You were one. You were one. You're not now. That's not your identity now. No. Why do you smile so much? Pat? Fred? Greg? What is your problem? The world? Bombs everywhere? Terrorists? Greg can say, I'm not happy about terrorists. I'm not happy about bombs. I'm not. All I know is the world was worse because I contributed to it. My evil made it worse. And I've been forgiven because of it. I would love to tell you about it. Did you hear what I just said? Oh, I don't want to hear it. No, did you hear what I just said? Religion's about guilt. It is, and it's been forgiven. Would you like me to tell you about it? I don't want to hear all that stuff. I'm a good person. Man, bless your heart. No, you're not. No, you're not. We can celebrate. It is a wonderful cross. He took exactly what we owed. He took my sin. He took it. He took the debt we owed. Took the debt we owed. The gargantuan Visa bill that would never get paid off. Now listen here, if you struggle with this guilt, I'm here to tell you, listen carefully and watch carefully. If you struggle in life with guilt, this is for you. Jesus of Nazareth, the God-man, when he died, he took all the junk you've done. He took it. He didn't, the Romans did, and nailed it straight to the cross. That's why he is praises victorious. Listen, if you struggle with guilt, listen to what just happened. The Apostle Paul is declaring, I know it looks on the outside this instrument of shame and torture that you got to walk around the rest of your life going, woe is me. He said, no, you don't. Woo! My sin's been taken care of. So what we're going to do to celebrate that fact is this. This is what we're going to do. The next screen here, Hayden. We're going to, in this Good Friday service, we're going to take on this cross the Post-it notes at the end of your aisle. Look on the end of your aisle. You should have some Post-it notes. You can pass a few down. I want you to write on these Post-it notes. Whatever it is. You can be as general as you want or as specific as you want. Why don't you take those notes, pass them down. We got plenty. We got plenty over here. Some of y'all might need a couple hundred, so take the time here. Here you go, buddy. You need a lot. I'm just kidding with you. There you go. Hey, the more you write, the better it is, right? If you struggle tonight, walking around life, oh, if they only knew, write it down. As general as you want, as specific as you want. That's up to you. Don't put your name on it, social security number, just put your name, none of that. Just put your sin, write it out. And in a second, what's going to happen is you're going to stand up and we're going to have communion. We're going to communion over here on the side. You're going to walk this way, have communion. You can come up here, and you're going to take your sins. We're going to give you a nail, because that's what you get in return, a reminder that it's over. Go back to your seat. What do you need to write down? What do you need to write down? Don't ever forget the cost it took to do what we're about to do.